Yeah, so React is just a JavaScript library. It's for building user interfaces. We can think of it as the V, or it can kind of replace the V in MVC. We'll also start to see, as we get more in depth with React, we can kind of, with other libraries, kind of make React its own little MVC framework. But for now, it's just essentially going to be the V in our MVC, and we've already been using it that way. I really like to think of React as like kind of like Legos, where you create components, and you can think of components as like the little Lego blocks. And with your blocks, you can build, you know, medium-sized components, and then with those components, you can build bigger components. So that is, you know, whenever we can do that with code, whenever we can, you know, create these reusable parts of our app and build upon them, that's going to make our lives easier as developers. Because then we can break up problems into simpler problems. We can, and then once we do figure out how to do something, we can reuse that logic. So I kind of have to, you know, build with just bricks. And that's how we can build really complicated apps, is if we can break stuff down and then build up with that. Before we learn React, and I think we have this, we need to kind of be a little familiar with HTML and CSS. We don't need to be experts with this. The nice thing with React is we can kind of get more expertise with React while we're also learning kind of these other concepts. So we kind of want to be familiar with HTML and CSS. We want to have like a basic knowledge of JavaScript, a basic understanding of the DOM, and we'll get more of an understanding of what this is, but the DOM just stands for Document Object Model. And that's just a fancy word for your HTML. When I inspect the element and I'm looking at this HTML, this is the DOM. And what JavaScript allows us to do is go manipulate this DOM. For instance, JavaScript allows us to like, let me inspect this. With JavaScript, I can come in, I can like find this component in the DOM or this text and, you know, change it. I'm doing this manually right now, but that's what JavaScript really allows us to do. And React is really good at, you know, working with the DOM. Familiarity with ES6 syntax and features. So we've already talked a lot about JavaScript and ES6. For now, we're just kind of keeping those the same. And we need to have Node installed, which we should all have from setup. So yeah, React is, let's just talk about React just really quickly. React is, as I said, it's a JavaScript library. It's probably one of the most popular libraries out there, especially JavaScript ones. It is not a framework. It's just a library. What this means is it's going to be a lot less opinionated. So when you solve a problem with React, there's going to be a lot of different ways you can solve it. If you're to use something like Angular, Angular has much more built into it by default, and it has much more of a conventional way to do things. So something like Rails is a framework. It's, you know, your full MVC. It has all this set up, has a very conventional way to do stuff. React is just like, you know, here's a hammer and a screwdriver. You build what you want with it. There are some conventions, there are some best practices, and we'll talk about those. But a lot of the time, React, you know, it gives the programmer more flexibility on how to use it. Yeah, so React is used to build interfaces on the front end. React is the view layer, MVC. We can think of that as the view. And React is an open source project created by Facebook, or maybe I should change that to Metaverse or whatever they call themselves now. So yeah, whether you like Facebook or not, it is a good thing that React created that and maintains it, because I mean, Facebook's like $1 trillion company with lots of some of the best developers. So you know React is going to be maintained and it's going to be used for a while. That's another good thing about learning React. Even if tomorrow React became not cool and people never wanted to use it, it would still be used for like the next decade, just because it's in so many projects right now. So React is definitely going to be around for a while. And yeah, if you're looking for like a front end job, React is probably the leader out of Angular and Vue. So yeah, the other solutions are Angular, Vue. There's a couple more, but I'd say these two are the most popular ones after React that are used, you know, at big companies. But the nice thing about like these libraries, a lot of the time when you're like looking for a job, they'll sometimes kind of consider these like similar. So it's like if they're looking for an Angular developer, they might, like, the job description might say something like, you know, Angular preferred, but if you have React, that counts as well. Or they might just say, you know, looking for a front-end developer who has, you know, 6 months experience with either React, Angular, or Vue. They want you just to have experience with one of them, regardless of which one they're using. So yeah, so we're going to, now we can just get into some code. Are there any questions just about React, what React is? I mean, we could also, like, just before we get into the code, let's just look at React. So once again, lots of documentations on React on their main page. So they have a lot of tutorials, a lot of guides of how to work with React. So always use this as a resource. One of the nice things about React, or a library being popular, is there's also going to be tons of just free resources out there. Like, we're going to talk about the use state hook. So, you know, some third-party company might write a blog about this, you know, where you can go in and get a little more information about this, you know, video. So there's tons of resources with React online. Let's also look at the React GitHub. Yeah, so it's just a open source project on GitHub. You know, with a 100, yeah, it has 180,000 stars almost. So yeah, it's a pretty popular library. I can look at the Git history. Looks like it's being maintained, obviously. So yeah. So there's some resources here. So let's just go ahead and get started with this. So like I said, today we're not going to be using Rails. So we're going to just create a React project. And to do that, I'm going to run this command. So this is going to be, the setup's going to be a lot easier than Rails because it's just essentially one command. So and this is kind of like the Rails new command. We're just creating a new React project. So I'm going to do a yarn create React-app, and then the whatever you want, you know, to call your project. So that's the syntax. Yarn create React app and then your project name. The lecture notes, it's a counter. We already did a counter, so let's do like just a toggler. And then you can reference the notes if you want to look at the counter, which we did on Friday.
Can you increase the size of your text, please?
Yeah. So then I just hit enter on that. So I did where did that start running? Yarn create React app, and then the name of the project, which I call toggler. And now it's building this out. This one takes a second just because it has to, with Rails will tend to use libraries that are already like it installs it in a portion, like a part of your computer. So you already have the libraries. With React, with JavaScript, it's going to download these libraries and packages for each project. So it kind of takes a second to build these because it's downloading all of these packages. So I was in my week 3 directory. I created that, yarn create React app toggler. So that just creates this toggler folder in this directory. It's exactly kind of like the Rails new. So I can just go ahead and cd into that. Notice also here, it gives me a Git repo by default. Check out my Git status. So now I have a Git repo, and let's just go ahead and open this up in code and see what that command gave us. So let's look at some of these files. First of all, the first one I want to look at is the package JSON. The package JSON is going to let us know what libraries we need for this project. It's very similar to the gem file in our Rails project, where it keeps track of our projects that or our third-party libraries that we're using. For instance, we're using the React library. Probably makes sense we need the React library if this is a React project. But there's some other stuff we can do. It's not quite like the gem file because there's other things we can throw inside of here. Like we can throw in some scripts. The one we're going to use today is this start script. So these are actually scripts that we can run through our terminal. And we're going to see this with the start one. Yeah. So I'm going to leave that at that. So with our package JSON, we can throw in our third-party dependencies, library dependencies, and we can also throw in some scripts to run via our terminal. We have a Git Ignore. The Git Ignore, we also have this in our Rails project. You might have seen this. This is just where we can throw, files that maybe we don't want to throw up to GitHub. So just this is more of a Git lesson. So you don't have to do this. You can just watch. Let's say I had a file called passwords. Because for some reason I needed like a password in here. And we'll see an example of this, like week 8 when we start working with like image uploads and environment variables. But let's say I have a password that I want to have in my app because I'm using it. But I don't want to push this up to GitHub because GitHub's, this is a public repo, so other people could go in and find this password. So what I can do is I can add this file to my Git Ignore. And now Git is not tracking that file. So now I can have it. So the Git Ignore gives you a way you can have files in your project that Git is not going to track. And so now this passwords file would not get pushed up to GitHub. One thing that is you always want to have in here is this node modules. So this node modules folder, this is where all of our code is living for this project. I mean, this is a huge, like, these are all the libraries that this React project depends on. We haven't even done anything yet, but this is everything that's dependent for this project to work. And if I look hard enough, I can find React. There's React. There's all the React code. So yeah. But we don't want to push this up because this file can get pretty big and we just don't want to keep track of that in GitHub. Instead, what we're going to keep track of is the libraries we need. And the reason why there's so many packages inside of here is because all of these libraries might have their own dependencies for things they depend on. So that's why there's so many packages in our node modules folder. And that's sometimes when you like do a git init and you don't exclude the node modules, you'll have like 10,000 plus files added to your folders. You're like, what? Why do I have 10,000 files added? Like, where did those come from? A lot of the time, that can be your node modules. So there's a lot of files in there. In our public, we'll just quickly look at this one. There's one file inside of here that we can look at, and that's your index.html. This is our index.html. This is our one index page, our one HTML page. So this React app, this is going to be a single page application. Why is it a single page application, or where do we get that name from? Because technically we only have this one HTML page. This is it. This is the thing that when we do an HTTP request, it's going to get back this HTML page and only this HTML page. So here's like our HTML, our header, all the stuff inside the head. Here's our body. And all we have right here in our body is one div with an ID of root. So we generally don't do anything with this HTML file unless you want to throw some stuff up in the head, like maybe a link to something, but we really generally don't do anything with this. The majority of the work we're going to do is in the source folder, like 99% of it. And if I look at the index.js, this is kind of where I take we'll look at this component in 1 second. I take this app component and I render it to my document. So the document is my HTML. So I render it to the get element by ID root. So I take my app component and I render it to that one div in my HTML. So that's kind of the connection between our React app and our HTML. And for now, we're really not going to do much ever with this index.js page. We will in the future, but for now, this is just kind of like our main. This is where we take our React app and where React's going to do all the work to actually convert it to the HTML. And then now we can look at this app.js. And this is kind of like our root component that React generated for us. So if I want to see this kind of work, what I can do is go into my terminal and run that yarn start. Now that start command is coming from my package JSON. So I can do yarn start. And it just ran that command that was in my, oh, it kind of started. I don't know if you saw that, but it just ran the command in my package JSON. I ran yarn start. It showed this command really quick being run. That's all that did. It's just an alias to run this command. And then I go to localhost 3000. And there is my React app. There's my server. So my server is just going to be continually running, watching for changes. So watch this. I'm going to go to my app.js. I'm going to go ahead and delete everything with this header component and just do like a H1 and say hello. I'm going to save that and go back. I don't know if you notice this. I didn't even have to refresh. I didn't have to go up here and hit refresh. There's something set up with this project called hot reloading. So it's going to watch for changes. So if I change a file, it's going to save it. It's going to rebuild it automatically, and it's going to refresh. So it can make the development process a little nicer. So let me do this. So I don't have to switch between screens so often. I'm going to just put these two side by side. A little trick with a Mac, I can go to this, in any app, find this screen button. And I can either go to a full screen or I can move this tile to the left or right. So I can move that to the, let's do that to the right. And then I can pick another app. And now that's just a quick way I can kind of split. I can take two apps and have them be kind of like a full screen. Command B to shut that.
Hey, James, I'm getting a weird error when I try to start the server.
Yeah, what does it say?
It just says, throw E error package subpath lib tokenize is not defined by exports.
That is a strange error. You want to share your screen? Let's look at that. Did anyone else have issues getting started with just getting this up and running? Come in here, run yarn. Everything up to date. Let's do this. Do a RM. Do RM space yarn.lock. Hit enter. And do a RM -rf space node, and then hit tab. Okay, now hit enter. Run yarn again. Will you also Slack me that error, the error package path not found? That's what I might need to look at during the break. You haven't like run this command before, have you?
No, this is my first time ever doing it.
Okay. I wonder if, will you split open also a new pane? In terminal. Just do it. I just want to see if you do a node dash V. Okay, I think we're going to need to, you installed the 17.0 version of Node, which is like the latest features. We're probably gonna, I think that might be the issue. So we need to like delete that version and install the 16 dot whatever version.
Okay.
That might be the issue. Try running yarn start again. I don't think this is gonna fix, because you just ran yarn that went. So yeah, now see if you can run yarn start now.
It worked.
What? Okay. We'll see if you might run into issues with that. I don't know why that even fixed it, to be honest.
Okay.
But that was like a good old fashioned like reset, turn the power on, power off type deal.
Right.
Cool. All right.
Okay.
Okay. So let's just get into this. So yeah, let's do a quick little toggler example, and then we'll kind of get into some, CRUD actions and working with an API. So I deleted this line right here. Have you ever noticed, you might start to notice code in VS Code that's a little grayed out. What this is it's VS Code telling you, you have this line of code that's not doing anything, essentially. Like what this is saying, hey, you're importing logo, but it's never used. So it's kind of grayed out. It's like, why are you doing that? It's like declaring a variable and never using it. See if it does it here. I don't know if it'll do it with this. If I say like x equal 1. See how x is grayed out a little? It's like you're declaring this variable, but you never use it. Like this is just not doing anything. So we probably want to get rid of code like that, just to keep our code clean. Cool. So now I can be side by side. I can make a change. I can save it, and it just updates. This can be a nice little feature. Help your development flow. All right. So let's come in here. I'm going to go to my File Explorer, and I'm going to make in my source. This is where I'm going to want to create all my files when I'm making components. I want to make a new file. I'm just going to call this toggler.js. Now, when we make components in React, we're going to start them with an uppercase letter, just kind of conventional. It's not going to break anything if we don't, but it's just kind of the convention. And also, for now, we're always going to be using functional components. There's ways to write class React components, but for now, we're just always going to do functional. They are, in my opinion, and most other people's opinions, a better way to do it. But I don't want to get into that now. So let's just say this is how we're going to write React components. is a functional component. Why am I calling this, or why are these called a functional component? Because this is just a function. Right? If I look at my app.js, this is just a function. It has the different syntax that we kind of learned about yesterday. Function app, parentheses, square brackets, returns some JSX. That's a valid function in JavaScript. So we're going to do arrow functions just to keep things consistent. So we have there's our function. Now in these React components, what they're going to return is what's referred to as JSX. And what that allows us to do is that allows us to embed JavaScript in HTML. It's kind of weird because we're in a JavaScript file, but now I can write stuff that looks like HTML. All right, let me do this first. Let me just return a paragraph that says hi, or toggler. And then I export default this function. So I define a function, then at the end I can export it. So this is how we, can use multiple files in React is we export our function. And then in my app.js, I can import that. Import toggler, it's even coming up in VS Code. I could hit tab to automatically fill that out. Import toggler from .toggler. This is what's referred to as a relative path. It's going to look, so the / means, hey, look in the folder I'm currently in. So look in the source folder and then look for that toggler file. If I don't have an extension on here, see how app.css has an extension and toggler doesn't? I mean, technically that's toggler.js. Why don't I need the .js? It's just kind of a convention, and by default, if there's no extension, it's going to assume it's a JS file. So if it's not a JS file, we put the extension. For instance, here we're importing our app.css. See, that just lives right there. But if it's a JS file, we don't need to say .js. I mean, you can, it's not going to break anything, but you won't see that in other people's demos. So now I import this component and then I can use it, toggler. I can use this multiple times. So here I'm rendering that toggler component. The toggler, I'm just defining the function. I'm not really using it here. I'm just defining that function, and then I export it, and then I can use it anywhere else in my app. I mean, what happens if this just returns? See if this is valid. See, this is just a function. I could have this just return 1. If it returns string hi, if I have it return an object, that really, I think, broke my app. We can't just blindly render objects. So if you try to render an object, it's not going to work. We do it in an array. React actually knows how to take in an array and then render it. But what we're generally going to return is some JSX here, JSX.
Did you already talk about why it's printing out twice over there?
Yeah, because I'm using this component twice. So I can reuse that component. So I'll just bring it back to 1. Now, a lot of the time with, so this is a pretty simple function, right? I'm trying to keep this really simple. Like it's just a function that's returning some data. It's going to return JSX. A lot of the time with JSX, we want this to be in multiple lines, like, you know, because I'd want to like nest, just like I would with HTML, you know, do a div, wrap my paragraph inside of that div. Let's save it. Right? Now this is going to get hard to read pretty quick, right? So what we can do with our return is if I want to write this in multiple lines, which is going to be a lot of the time with JSX, is I can use parentheses. And now I can write this as a multi-line return. If I don't have the parentheses, I'm not sure if this works or not. Right. This is actually going to return. It's not going to return anything because this is undefined. So if I want to return multiple lines, I need to use the parentheses. But now I can write out, I can have a return that, you know, writes out that, you know, I can write out all this, you know, HTML looking JSX. Cool. As we saw on Friday, I can pass a component props. So what I can do here is when I render my component, I could give this like a, I don't know, I can call this whatever, like these props, whatever X. Let's just call it foo as our general some value here. So I can pass my components what's called props. And then in my components, my component function can receive props. And now I can get those props. By whatever I called it.
Can it be any word here, or does it have to be props?
You tell me.
I think it could be any word.
Yeah, because this is just a function, right? So yeah, this can be any word, but we're always going to call this, like if I call that X, that works. It's just a JavaScript function. But yeah, what this really is that's what's referred to as props. So that's what we're going to call it. Remember how we learned about destructuring where I said like const foo equals props? That works too. I could do a console.log props and inspect that. I console.log my props. It's right here. There's my object. Has this foo key. What I'm trying to say here, props is just a JavaScript object. So what can I do with an object? I can destructure an object, right? I can pull off the keys from that object. So yeah, I could call that X. And that's going to all work. One of the nice things I think about React is a lot of it is just JavaScript. There's nothing in this component other than the JSX. That's the only like React-ish thing going on here. Other than that, this is just a JavaScript function that is taking a parameter, or it's taking an argument. That argument is going to be a object with whatever keys we pass to it. But I'm not going to call that X. I'm going to call that props. So then I could destructure this object and go on from there. There's actually another shortcut. You might see this. If props is if you have a function, so this isn't React, this is just JavaScript. If you have a function and you know this parameter is going to be an object and you know the keys, you can destructure that right there. So what this is saying, it's like saying, hey, take the foo key off of the object that is getting passed to this function. So then I don't have to do that or that. And now foo is going to be defined. That works too. That is not, that's nothing, that's just JavaScript. That's not React. I'll leave that example there. I think for now, I'm probably going to do it this way where I destructure just so we can get some practice destructuring. This kind of cleans up your code a little more because instead of having to do like props.foo, now I can just say foo. It's going to make your code a little more readable. And I can just destructure all of those keys up there. So think of props as like arguments to a function. This is how I can pass down things to my component. Let's look at this name foo and if this is important or not. So let's go back to my app.js. And I do something like this. I'm going to change these. I'm going to say some foo here, some bam here. So this works, but where I say some foo here, but this toggler where I have this bam prop, that's not going to say some bam here. Because the prop name here is foo, the prop name here is bam. So what I can, if I go back to my toggler, sorry, I zoomed in too much. Now this might get a bam prop. Something like this, foo. So just it's something to kind of think about. I can kind of name a prop whatever when I render my component. Zooming out too much. But But now I have one that has, you know, foo prop and one that has a band prop. So I'm probably going to want to match these names, you know, so they both have a foo prop. Does that make sense?
I think keep track of it then if they're both called the same thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like going back to this uniform data. You know, I'm going to want these to be uniform when I reuse them. So in my components, you know, I just have foo. So what might be a like applicable example with this is, you know, this could be like title. Like my toggler has like a title prop. And then here I can come in here and do like a title 1. And here I can do a title 2. Now what we'll see a lot of is that maybe our components, you know, have a lot of props, but you don't have to use them. Like maybe there's like an optional prop. I'm just gonna, yeah. So we might have components that, you know, have a lot of props that they can get, but they're not necessarily, it doesn't mean they have to use all of them. Let me show you if I can like just quickly give you an example. Something we are going to use is something called Semantic Ui React. These are some predefined components. Just maybe want to show you like if I look at props. So there's like a card component that we might use. A card will give us like, this is a way we can maybe make a nice looking card. We're not going to do this today, but you know, with Semantic UI React, we can create this pretty easily. And this card component is going to have a lot of props. Like this is all the props you can pass it. Now we don't have to always pass it every single one of these props, but these are all the props that we can pass it. And it'll know how to do that. For instance, if we want to like give our card an image, we can give it an image prop. We don't have to give it an image. If we don't give it an image, it might look something like this. If we give it an image, then it'll give us an image. So this is kind of, we can create these components to, you know, handle a lot of props, but it doesn't mean we always have to use them all. So that's a little more detailed than what we're going to be getting in today, but just kind of going into what props are. You can think about them as arguments to a function. But it's a little different because I'm naming them right here and then giving them the values. So now if I go back to my toggler, I can now have a title prop. And inside of here, instead of using that hard-coded thing, I can use the title. Now foo's not defined because I no longer pull that from props. That's fine. What did I call it? Like additional prop. You spelled that wrong.
I think it was optional prop.
Oh, optional prop. Okay, yeah. Optional prop. I'm going to do something. that we're going to start to see with React. You can do this with Ruby. This is actually just a general coding thing, but I want to kind of show you this. All right, let's look at this. So I rendered this component twice. Both of them had a title, right? So I'm just going to render that title as an H1. But now I have this weird syntax, optional and paragraph, where I hard code the word optional and then I grab that prop, which the value was yo. So that makes sense. If I look at my app, this component has a title, but it doesn't have the optional prop. This one does have the optional prop yo. So this one, the first one's not even rendering this paragraph at all. So what is this weird syntax? This is what's referred to as a short circuit evaluation. This is kind of like a little trick slash hack. This isn't like a JavaScript thing or a React thing. This is kind of just like a coding trick. And we're kind of combining it in a React-ish way. But let me explain what's going on here. Because what is happening, if I were to give you like a conditional, because this is just logic. If I were to say, my name is James and I'm 100 feet tall, is that true? That's false, right? Because I'm not 100 feet tall. If I reverse the order of that and I said, I'm 100 feet tall, and would it matter what I say after that? Like, would that ever be true? Is what I'm getting at. Right? If I have an and statement, both things have to be true, right? I am 100 feet tall, and whatever I say after that, it doesn't matter if it's true or false, because the first thing was false. So computers and the programming languages have been so efficient that if they run into an and statement and they find that the first thing's false, they're just going to stop running. So what's going to happen here if optional prop is undefined? Remember, undefined has a falsy value. So the first time around, when this gets the optional prop, it's going to be undefined. So it's not even going to run this code. It just kind of stops. So that just goes away. So nothing is rendered. If optional prop is true, it's going to run this and it's going to look at this second thing, which is just going to be like, oh, okay, put that there. So this is a quick way to do like an if statement. If this is true, then do this. So and we'll see this quite a bit, because that's a nice quick way to write that, right? Does it make sense though, like that, the lingo? Like if I have an optional, if I get the optional prop, then render it. If I don't get the optional prop, then don't render that. It's a really clean way to do that. Conditional rendering. I'll use that term. Conditional rendering. Cool. So let's keep going. So that's a little more detail into props. Like I said, you can pass whatever you want. You can just, all you need to do is, maybe we want these to be able to take a number. Or let's do an array. This can be any kind of data. This in the wrong spot. So now I could pass a prop called numbers, and that could be in an array of numbers. So then in my toggler component. Also, you want to know some quick shorthands in VS Code. I can hover over a component, and I can commit like over the name of the component, and I can do a command click. That takes me to the file. I can do a control minus to take me back to the file I was at, or to where my cursor was. So, but that's a quick little shorthand. A command click on your component takes you to the file. Cool. So now these take a numbers. Now these can be given a numbers prop. I don't know, let's let's do it here. I could do a numbers dot map, go through each number and return a paragraph. So right here, I can do a numbers.map, go through each of my numbers and wrap them in a paragraph. Or something that I like to do is put this logic, if I'm mapping over something that's maybe a little more complicated, is to write a function and do the rendering there. I'm going to do the exact same, just the numbers.map. Go through each of my numbers. And return a number in a paragraph. Render, I spelled that wrong. Saying render numbers is not defined because I call this rendered number. I'm calling the function rendered numbers. So I'll just fix that typo. So this is not rendering. Just to show you. Do render numbers in a function. Render numbers directly in return. So my render numbers, notice how they're not actually rendering. That's because I'm forgetting my return right here. That one's just saying n because I'm not interpolating my number. Let's just time those by 2, just so it's different. So I render my number directly in the return, or I can call a function that does it there. I think sometimes there's really not a difference. I can just do this here directly, or I could create a function that does the same thing. This might be a cleaner way if like your mapping function gets a little more messy with the JSX. Why don't I need a return here, but I do need one there?
So you're already within your parentheses of that return.
Yeah, I'm already in a return. So this is just going to put it right there. I need the return for this one because this is a function. So this function needs to actually return that array. Oh. So that's props. We've talked a lot about props, rendering over stuff, some conditional rendering, with some short circuit evaluation, which we'll see more. Let's do, so this is a toggler example. So let's talk about another thing. We did see this, we'll see this a lot, and that's this use state. So something that's very like basic with React, or very common, a core concept of it is state. So we want to have some state. Maybe we want to be able to toggle, you know, our numbers. We want to be able to toggle something. Doesn't really matter. Let's just say we have a, no, I'm just going to do a paragraph here, and I'm just going to say thing to hide or to toggle. And then I'm going to have a button here, toggle thing. So when I click this button, I want this thing to toggle to hide and show. Likewise with this component as well. So whenever we think about this, this is kind of referring to the state of our component. You know, do we want to show this thing, whatever it might be, or do we not want to show it? You know, because this thing could toggle. Maybe this is like, maybe this is like a form. Just to give you like an example. And this could be like a new button. So when I click new, I want to see this form. Or it could be whatever though. So what I'm going to do is I want to create some state. And to do that, I need to use this use state hook. We talked about this on Friday, but we'll just do a review. Getter. We'll just call this get state and set state equals use state equals initial state. So this is our general formula of our use state hook. So we have this const get state and set state. So we have a way to get state and we have a way to set state. And then we call our use state hook and we can pass it initial state. what is this syntax right here with the curly brackets? It looks, sorry, with the square brackets. It looks a lot like our destructuring, right? That is actually what's going on here. Let me just show you this. So if I have a node, let me open up node. Let's say I have an array. Equals 1, and then the second thing in my array is a function. So I just haven't, this is just an array who has as its first value is just the number 1. And then the second thing in the array is a function. Actually, let's maybe throw in a function that says like console.log. That actually does something. Or let's just have this function return 2. I don't know, whatever. That's already been defined. Just going to reassign it. Okay. So now I have my array whose first thing is a number, second thing is a function. So what I can do here is I can do const. I can, like, it's very similar to the ES6 destructuring with objects. I can do like array destructuring. Now, the one difference is with when I destructure objects, I have to match the name of the key because that's how I'm going to find it. With arrays, how I can destructure is I just have to match the index. First thing, second thing. So I can name it whatever equals array. If I type first thing, what do you think that's going to be? I'm showing it right there. The first thing is the 1, right? Because that's what I define as the first index in my array. The second thing is a function that returns 2. So if I actually call that function 2. So after going through that review, or that, not review, but that intro into this is just JavaScript destructuring. If I ask you the question, what type of data, or what is the data structure that useState returns with how I'm using it right here?
Array.
Yeah, useState returns in an array whose first argument is going to be the state and whose second argument is going to be a function that can set that state. So if I wanted to do something like a toggler, and since it's in an array, I can name this whatever. I can name these variables whatever. I just have to match the order. So the first thing is the state. I'm going to call this just show things. That's what it's doing. The second argument is the function that can set that state. Equals useState. And this is where I can pass the initial state. So this is I want this to be a Boolean because I either want this to be true or false because it's going to tell me whether or not to show the thing. So the default state I want to be true. You know, or on Friday, we did a counter. So I could use my useState hook again, count, set count, useState. Well, maybe I want my counter default state to be 0. You know, I might have some like user state. We'll probably do something like this later on where like, you know, I'm expecting that to be an array of objects, but my initial state, maybe I just want that to be an empty array because I don't have any users yet. So, but the use state hook just returns a way to get that state, a way to update that particular state, and we can pass the use state function our first argument, which is going to be the initial state of our thing. Cool. So now I have this show thing Boolean. So now once again, what I can do is I can use that short circuit evaluation, show thing and return that. So now I have this Boolean. So if this is true, then I'm going to show it. If this is false, it's not going to show that. And I could test this by setting my initial state to false. Now, when I make that false, it doesn't show that thing. But now I want to be able to toggle that with a click. So here's another thing that's very common with React is we do event handling. So an event is just something that occurs on your web page. It could be, there's lots of different events. Let's see if I can maybe on abort, on capture, on animation end, on before input, on blur. These are all the events on change, on click, on drag. So think about scrolling. If you're scrolling, you can scroll if you drag something. If you, and look with like something on drag, look how many different events there are on just dragging. So there can be like, did you start your drag? Did you end your drag? Did you leave your drag? So there's a lot of events. Here's some key ones. Did you press the key? Is it down? Is your key up? On load, did you load data? Did you do stuff with your mouse? So one of the things JavaScript can do is a lot of stuff with events. So the event I want to use here is on click. Let's just do this. I'm going to write the function in right here because it's going to be a very small function. Actually, let's just do this like this, and then I'm going to put it in here. Toggle thing. So toggle thing is not defined. Let's define that const toggle thing. Okay, so I want to set show thing. And I should actually call this toggle show thing. So what I really want to do is I want to take the value of whatever show thing is, and I want to make it the opposite, right? So if show thing is true, I want to here make it false. If it's false, I want to make it true. So I want to invert it. So what I can do here is set show thing to the opposite, to the not value. So if it's not true, that's going to be false. Not false is true. So here I can just negate the value. What thing? I think. And now when I click that toggle, it's toggling this Boolean. It's toggling this state, which this state is then controlling whether or not this gets rendered. Now I could write, I'm going to comment this out. This is pretty, there's not that much code in this function, right? I could just like throw this inside of here. Right, on click, just set show thing to not show thing. Does this make sense? Right, just this line right here on line 17. I'm just setting the value of my Boolean to the opposite value that it is. And that's going to create my toggler. That's just a quick way to do a toggler. Now on my on click, I'm going to set show thing to this. I'm just putting, instead of writing this as a function outside of, a name function, I'm just going to throw it in right here. I'm going to save it. And now it's not working. I want to see the error. Come on, where's my error? There we go. Too many re-renders. So React limits the number of renders to prevent an infinite loop. Okay, because this is an error you're going to see. So let's talk about what's happening. And what's the difference between this, where I write it in a function, and this? Does anyone see the difference? There's one, they are doing the same thing, but there's one little difference that's happening. We kind of talked about it yesterday. So remember, okay, this toggle show thing, is this actually calling the function? There's no parentheses, right? This set show thing, it has the parentheses, right? It's calling the function. Let me show you this way. So if I comment this one back up and then I call the function, now I'm going to get that same error. Too many re-renders. So what is this error? Why am I getting it? So what's going on, and this is going to help us understand this use state hook in a little better, is when I render this component, this function actually runs because I have the parentheses. I don't have to click it because I have the parentheses there. So the function's actually called. So it runs this function and it set show things. So that changes the state to be the opposite of whatever it's not. And whenever I call the use state hook, or whenever I call the set function from my use state hook and it changes the state, it's actually going to trigger this component to be re-rendered to the DOM. So this gets re-rendered. Well, what happens when this gets re-rendered? We call this function again. What does that do? That sets show thing, it inverts the value. Well, we just reset our state. That's going to re-render this. Can you see how now we're in the infinite loop? So if I don't have the parentheses here, what happens is it doesn't call the function because I don't want this to call when my page renders. I want it to call when my function, I want it to be called when my function, when my button gets clicked. So now when my button gets clicked, the function's called. So let me show you this. Let's say I go back to the parentheses. How could I get this to work? I could, because I don't want this to call, what I could say is I could just say, hey, return this as a function. This is a weird way to do it. Like you'd never do this, but now I can call toggle show thing. I can call the function, and now this function just returns this function. So it actually doesn't call it. It just returns it. And now I can toggle this and now it works and it doesn't cause the infinite loop. But yeah, the cleaner way to do this, if I have it in another function, is just not to call it. Cool. But let's do it this way now. So this way I do it, you know, this is a small function and I don't maybe want to have to write another function. I just want to throw this inside of here. Well, the same way how I got this to work with the parentheses by returning this as a function, I'm going to do that right here. I just declared an anonymous function that returns this function. So now I can pass this, because I have to pass it this parameter, right? I can't just say, hey, set show thing. That's not going to work, because I need to pass set show thing a value. So I have to use the parentheses. But what I can do is I can have this on click. I can wrap it in a function that returns this call. And now that works. So that would be the same thing as, so what I do, I wrap it in a function that returns this function that calls it. That's just what I did right here when I called this function. And then I had this function return a function. Let me get syntax errors. So yeah. Hopefully that maybe sunk in a little. But that explains this thing. So if you want to do like a anonymous, have an on click, because we don't want this to call when it renders, we want it to call when it's clicked. But sometimes I might need to pass that function in my click handler a parameter. So I have to use the parentheses. Well, if I need to do that, then I can just wrap that in a function that returns that function call. It's a little bit of a mind bend, but that's not really to do with that. Once again, that's just a JavaScript thing. It's not really a React thing. Cool. Let's take a break here. Let me Slack this one out, this component. And let's come back at, let's call it 11:15. And when we get back, we're going to do CRUD actions. Cool.
James, your mic's on.
Oh, thank you. You said my mic was on, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So what we're going to do today, and I slacked this out. This is a Trello card. You can feel free to like copy this and add what you need to. But what we're going to do today, or for the rest of the lecture, is we're going to not all the way, but we're gonna start trying to do like some CRUD actions with React, and even use some dummy data from a API. So we have this website right here, this rec.res. What this allows us to do is it just allows us to do some basic calls. We're actually only going to be doing one call. We're just going to be doing a GET request to this website. So we're doing a GET request to API/users. If I do that, that just returns in an object. But inside of that object is some data, and that data is in an array of users. So if this was a Rails app, we kind of saw this. This might be like, getting a user.all and then rendering JSON that data. I don't know if this is a Rails app, but that's what it's doing. So it's just saying this is their API saying, hey, if you do a HTTP GET request to this URL, this is what you're going to get back. So we're going to use this and this is just dummy data. We could do like a post. If we do a post request to API users and pass it this data, we're going to get back this. Now, this actually isn't going to save anything to a database. It's just something you can kind of test with. It's just kind of a practice dummy database backend. So like I said, we're only going to be doing this call. But this actually allows us to do an actual API call to another database. So we don't have to hard code the data. And then we can try to do some CRUD actions on that data. So let's go ahead and get started. So I could do this in my app.js, or what I think is just a cleaner way to do this is I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this users.js. Because that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be grabbing this is just component is going to be responsible for rendering some users. So const users. Just going to write my function. Can give this props if I want. We might not use it right now, but return. So I'm just making a simple React component right now where we're going to do all this work, just kind of keeping things simple though to start out with. Just want to see, I'm creating the component. It's going to return some simple JSX, and then I just want to render this to my page. So here's where I'm defining it. If I want to use this, I can go to my app.js. I'm going to get rid of this or comment this out just to keep this cleaner. And then I'm going to render my users component. So I need to import this, right? Here can be a quick way or fast way to do this. I can start typing out this component. And this pops up in VS Code users. If I have that export default, this VS Code should be able to find this. And it says like auto import from users. So if I see this, what I can do is I can hit tab. And that does an auto import. It's going to just be a quick way to import that. Or I could come up here and manually type import users from, and give it the path. If I did something like this, import users from ... users, that's not going to work because I put ... What the ... dot's doing, it's going to say, hey, go back a directory and look inside of your root for users, so it can't find it. So a lot of the time VS Code can help us, you know, if I'm looking for a particular file, I can use VS Code to maybe see if that file's there. If it's not there, then I should go investigate, you know, why don't I have a users here? Well, I have a source users. So go back, because right now I'm in my source, so I could go out of my source, back into my source, into my users. And that's silly because that's where I started from. So now I have, I want to print, Command P, I can go back to my users, or I can do a command click on my users component to go back there. All right, so let's do this. Let's import use state, because we're going to have some state. We're going to have user state from React. I'm going to call this the state users, and then the function to set it, I'm going to call that set users. Any guesses on what my initial state should be? I could look here, see this is what my data is going to look like in an array of objects. That's what my users is going to look like. Any ideas on maybe what should this be set to initially?
Just a blank array.
Yeah, I could do a blank array. I think another valid answer would be maybe just set it to null. But for now, let's do a blank array. Let's do a inside of here render users function. Because this might get, you know, I think it's just going to be cleaner to do this in its own function than trying to do it in the return. So render users. I could even do a check right here, like if users dot length equals 0, no users. That's another thing I can do inside of, you know, these functions. Maybe I want to do some logic. Maybe I want to handle the case if like my array is empty. So now I can say no users. All right. We're going to talk about another hook. This is called the use effect hook. Because what we want to do is when the component mounts, i.e. renders to DOM, meaning we can see like this, what it means when a component mounts to the DOM it just essentially means like your HTML is there. Like this happens really fast. Like if I hit refresh, my component, how do I know my component's mounted? Well, because I can see this user here's text and no users. Like that's been mounted to the DOM. So once that mounts, what I want to do is I want to do, you know, I want to grab my data from that rec-res site. So once this mounts, which is really quick, I want to grab the data. So first of all, how do I do something when the component mounts? Well, this is where I'm going to use the use effect. We're going to talk about the use effect in more detail later, but essentially, the use effect is a function whose first argument can be is a function. Right? If I said the use effect function was a function whose first argument was a number, then I would need to pass it a number. If it was a string, I pass it as a string. But the use effect, the first thing I give it is a function. The second thing, and we're going to do this, just kind of take my word for this now. The second thing we're going to pass it is an empty array. And what I'm going to say for now is the empty array makes this run only on mount, which is what we need for now. And by this, I mean the function we passed it. So as we're going to start to notice with JavaScript, and it's more just the nature of the web. Lately, when we've been writing code, especially like the first week, our code can be very linear. You know, like we do this line, we do the next line, we do the next. It's very synchronous. That's the word. You just do one thing after another. But once we get into the world of the web and like UIs and UX, our code becomes very asynchronous, meaning things can happen whenever. Like they're not going to happen in order. Like things are only going to run maybe when you click a button or when events occur, like when our component mounts. So it's not just one thing after another. So what we're doing with a lot of these things, and we did this like with our toggler, is we're passing like the on click things, we're passing these things called what's called callbacks. Hey, run this function when this event occurs. So that's why we're passing around so many functions. It's because we want to keep track of this this way to do this functionality when a certain thing happens. And with our users component and our use effect, that's what we're doing here. We're saying, hey, do stuff like this first function we're doing, like do stuff when component mounts. So that's the function that we're passing here. And for now, maybe I could do like a console.log mounted. So if I refresh, I'm going to see that mounted log. So this, and like I said, this happens really fast. The component, refreshes, it mounts this to the DOM. So this is ready to go. it calls this callback function, which just logs mounted. Now this use effect can do other stuff, but for now, this is how we're going to write it. It is a function. And I'll just kind of stub it out like this, use effect. Its first argument is a callback. And the second argument is a empty array. What's a callback? A callback's just a function. Callback function. So I'm going to log console.log mounted, and then I'm going to create a function called get users. I need to define that function const get users. Now I'm just going to say console.log. Get users here. So we've mounted our component, and then I'm going to call this get users function whose responsibility it is to get users. Little weird syntax, and why we want this to be, so why do I want this to happen when the component mounts? Well, I want to make sure my React is ready before I try to render my users. I don't want to get because maybe I get my users and that happens before it's ready to render those users. So that's another thing with asynchronous code is sometimes, we need to make sure things are done before we do certain things. It's like if I was baking a cake, I would want to make sure my cake has been baked before I put on the frosting. If I tried to put on the frosting before my cake was baked, that wouldn't work. So that's what I'm doing here. I want to make sure my component's mounted before I get the users. All right, so I'm going to get rid of this console.log. And this is where we need to do what's called our Axios call. Well, for now, I'll say like HTTP request. Actually, I'll call this API call. And we're going to use Axios. So I'm going to do this. Axios.get. We're going to do an Axios.get request to this website. And the direct API route was, it's a get request to API users. I don't need to do that page equals to. I'm just going to do API/users. So somewhere in their controller, they have probably like, a users controller with a index method that if I do a get request to API users, it's going to do that method. If I do this, I'm going to get this error. Axios is not defined. So Axios is not a library in JavaScript that we get by default. There's a lot of these libraries like this. They're not just going to be included. So what I need to do is I need to install it. I need to do a yarn add Axios. This is kind of like going to the gem file in Ruby and adding the gem Axios. Except what this does is it goes up and downloads this project or this Axios project into our code. And if I were to look at like my package.json, now I have Axios.
What was the command line to install Axios?
Yarn add Axios. So to add in Node, this is any JavaScript package, and we're going to be using Yarn. There's also an npm command to do it, but we'll use Yarn. The command is going to always be yarn add, and then the name of the package that we want to add. So we want to add Axios, we do a yarn add, and then the name. And that goes in, it downloads it, it adds it to the package JSON. It's going to add the Axios package to our node modules. So we are good to go. I need to restart my server. So yarn start. See, there's that React script start. I'm still going to get that error though, because I've just added it to my project, but now when I use it, their users. I always forget the command to close this thing. Okay. I need to import it. So import Axios from Axios. Now, if I don't give this a path, like, you know, with all our other components, we did like a backslash and gave it the path. If I don't give it a path, it's going to look in my node modules folder for Axios. So that's where it's going to look. So if it's an Axios package, it will look in your node modules. There it is. So it'll know how to find it there. Let's set this to a variable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say let response equals this. And I'm going to console.log my response. I'm going to pull up my console. I'm going to hit refresh. So what I get back is a promise. See how it says promise pending? Now, we'll talk more about promises in detail later, but for now, let's just kind of think about what a promise is. Like if I promise you something, that means I'm going to do it. But it also says pending. So what's happening here is I have a promise that's pending. So think about an API call to a database. We're actually requesting data from another server. Like who knows where this server is? It could be in China, it could be in California. But I'm asking to get this data and I don't know how long it's going to take. But what Axios.get is going to return, it's going to return this promise, which essentially says, hey, I'm either going to be successful. I promise you I'll give you back something, whether it's successful or not. I'm going to give you back something. And the reason, but I don't know how long it's going to take. So once again, we're getting into this asynchronous code because it's just the nature of the web. Like I want to get some data from a database. It could take 2 seconds, it could take half a second, it could take 5 minutes. I don't know. But what this gives me back is a promise. So how I can utilize a promise is I can do the async await syntax. Async await is a newer feature in JavaScript. I think it's like ES7 or ES8 when this was introduced. But it's a really nice syntax. Because what I can do is if I have a call that returns a promise, so Axios.get returns a promise. what I can do is I can await for that promise to occur, like to fulfill. So what I'm saying is I'm awaiting for this Axios call, this API call to finish. So actually, pauses my code right here and waits for API call to finish. Really, it's really clean. There's another way to do that gets looks a little messy. This is really nice because now my code reads like it's synchronously. We're just going from one line to the next. But what's really happening is we're just pausing right here and waiting for this to finish. But if I want to use this await keyword, I have to make my function async.
Is there a way to set it up where it's like if it doesn't get anything back within a certain time, it just gives up?
Yeah, there's definitely ways to do that, but we're not going to do that now. Or ever. We might not do that. That's a little more complicated. Because then we have to like set up timers. Probably want to use another library, but yes, there is ways for sure to do that where we can set a timer and say, hey, if this promise doesn't execute in 20 seconds, then fail or stop trying to do it. So now when I refresh this, now instead of getting a promise back, I get back that response. That looks a lot like, what it was previewing in, their kind of API. So if I actually do a response.data, log that. Where's my localhost 3000? If I log my response.data, well, there's that object that has page per page, support, total, and data. So res.data is actually this whole thing, which is this object. But notice there's also a data key in there, which is the actual array of users. So I need to do res.data to get the array of users. Refresh. There's my array of users. So now here I could set my users to response.data.data. Notice how the no users went away. I could do something like this, return, just so we can see it, users.data or users.length. Now see, this happened really quick. Sometimes these API calls are really quick. I don't know if you can see that when I refresh, it quickly shows no users, and then I have 6. So my component mounts, and for a split second, it says no users. And it starts doing the Axios call. So it mounts, it starts doing the Axios call. We do our async await, we do our request. Now this is asynchronous, it kind of takes, it takes a couple milliseconds. So we kind of pause here, but then we wait for that response to come back. Once we get it, we can then set our users to that data. And then remember, once we call this set function, it's going to re-render our component. So then we re-render our component, rerun this render users function. Then we do have length, so we return the length of the array. So there's a lot going on in quarter of a second there, right? This is all happening really fast. But does that flow make sense when I explain it out loud like that? I think this can be good to kind of understand it from like to stop here and kind of think about that, how we have this set up. So when we first initially render this component, we have a user state, which is just going to be set to an initial array. We go ahead and we mount this component. So we do users here, we render users. We go ahead and return this no users because we don't have any link. And we render that to the DOM, to our browser. So that triggers our use effect to get called. So then we log mounted and then we get our users. Our get users, we do an Axios call where we await for that to finish. And then once it finally does, we set our users to response.data. Calling this set users, which remember is our function from our use state hook, that's going to update our state. It's going to update our user state to whatever we pass inside of here. And then that also triggers a re-render. So we rerun this function. We go ahead and rerun this return. So users here, we call the render users. So this time we do have users.length. So then we return users.length. So yeah, that can be a mouthful, but that is what's going on there. So here instead, in my render users, instead of returning users.length, let's return users.map. Let's do a map function, go through each user and return some JSX. So I'm going to do this return. Let's just start simple now. Let's just do the div. I believe we have an ID. Looks like I'm getting an error. Let's refresh. Oh, where's my error? So something, this error is a little hidden. As you start working with JavaScript, you're going to, and HTML pages, you're going to want to kind of, you are going to want to have your inspect element open. Because right now I see this X, this red X with the 1, that might show me there's an error. This is just a warning. So this isn't really breaking it, but I am getting a warning. We'll look at this one really quick in a second. But what I have now is I don't have any users rendering, but it's not really breaking. Like, let me show you like what a break looks like. Like that's when my code breaks. I have like undefined, X is not defined. But what I had here is I had users.id. Still got that. Sometimes you have to hit refresh to get the changes. Why am I not rendering the ID of my users?
You need u.id.
Yeah, I said users.id. Remember, users is the array. When I map over, I give it the function that's going to run on each user, which I'm calling u. So I need to do u.id. Might even be better to call that user. It's a little more clear. There's the ID of my users. I could also look at like when I'm logging this object to see what I have. Like a user has an avatar, it has an email, has a first name, has an ID. So I could go ahead and, maybe add some of that stuff. Like do an H1 user dot first name, user dot last name. And then, maybe like a paragraph, user dot email. Maybe just quickly come in here and give this some styling. Oh, let's do a class name. So if I wanted to give this some styling, I could do it with a class. But remember with JSX, we can't use the keyword class because that's a JavaScript word, reserved word. So I have to call it class name. Come in here and give it a class, user container. And then I have like an index.css where I could do some styles. If I wanted to add my CSS, so I could do a dot user container. Let's just do a border. 1 pixel solid black. Let's give some margin. So margin is going to give me space. So I have a border. Margin is going to give me space outside of that border. Do a little quick CSS stuff here. So this is a way how I can separate my elements. See, now I have 4 pixels of margin from that border. Want that a little bigger, I could do 10. Padding gives me space within the border. So now I have 20 pixels of padding. So that's inside that border. The margin is outside of the element. So that's that. These ones, margin and padding, those are used quite a bit. So just know that distinction. Margin is the space outside of the element, and padding is the space within the element. And the border could be like the element. That's like the border of the element itself. So that just gives me a little, making a very basic card. So that's one way you can do styling with React. Just give it a class name and just do normal HTML, CSS styling. Cool. So yeah, but if I go back to my console and I look at this error warning, each child in a list should have a unique key prop. What this is saying is, React wants, if I'm mapping over something or I'm creating a list of something, which we're going to be doing when we do a map, React wants the parent element, HTML element, to have a key ID or a key prop. So this just has to be something unique. So I could just use the user.id. Refresh that, and then that error message goes away. So it's not going to break anything for now, but it's just could cause problems down the road. So whenever that's just something React wants. It wants a key when I create a list of something with a unique value. And my ID should be unique. Questions on that? Let me select this out so far, because this is like we've done our get. So if we're talking about CRUD, this is like we've done our read, for getting all users. So it's a little bit of work, right? We have to do the use effect. So in our component mounts, we call our Axios. That's where we actually do our API call, and then we use Axios to get the data. Then we get our response back, and then we can set our user state. And then we can finally render over those users and create the array of JSX. So that's quite a bit. But let's keep going. Let's do a add function. So what I'm going to do here is let's create a button. Say new user. Now, how would we normally, like if this was last week, how would we normally do this? If I wanted to create a new user, what would we first do? Or like if we're on our React, what would we be doing? So there's kind of a big distinction. Like, why am I using a button here? Wouldn't I normally use a tag and go to like users/new, right? Yeah, so we're not going to do this because what we have right now is we have a single page application. So we're not going to have any A tag. An A tag is going to do a new request to get a new HTML page. And we actually don't have this set up, right? We don't have a Rails backend set up to give us back a form. So this wouldn't even work, right? Because that's going to give us a 404 not found because we don't have this route set up. We don't even have a server set up for this. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a button. And instead of getting our form from a server, why don't we just create a form in JavaScript? New user form. Let's just call it new user. .js. Let's just do our basic component const new user. And zoom things getting in my way. New user. It's going to take some props. Turn div each one new user. And this is eventually going to be a form. Export default new user. So I'm going to make a component that's going to be my, my form to make the new user. And then in my users component, I can now use that component I just made, and I can auto import it. Actually, I'm not gonna do this toggler yet. Let's just have the form here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send back this page that has a list of my users, but then also has this form. We could set up a toggler like we did in the previous example, but for now, for sake of time, let's just have the form here. New user. So then I can start building out this form. So let's go back to this component. This form. What do we have? We have like a first name. Last name. I mean, we have more fields than this, but for now, I'm just going to do a first name and last name and email. And then a button. Oh, a new line. Cool. So there is my form. So normally what we would do on our Git is on this form, we would have a action and then the method post. We're not going to do that though. Because once again, this would do another HTTP, like this would do a new page request. We're going to use instead, we're going to do Axios to do this because we don't want to do, we're not going to do a full on GET request for a new page. We're going to have Axios handle all this stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a function in here, handle submit. And on my form, I'm going to have a on submit handler. It's going to call my handle submit function. And I'm just going to say console.log submitted. So I go to my console. I can use this gray X or this circle line with it through it to clear my console. It'd be nice to like help read this. I'm just going to click add user. I don't know if you saw that. It said submitted really quick and then it went away. So by default, we are refreshing the page right here. Now we don't want to refresh our page in React, or I should say in a single page application. When we refresh the page, you know, we're going to reset our state. We're going to do another HTTP request. We don't want to do that. So what this function can actually, its first argument is an event. I don't have to call this event, but that can be a good name. What I want to do is I want to do a event.prevent default. So what that's going to do is it's going to prevent that new request that HTML forms do by default. So now when I click add user, it says submitted and it doesn't refresh my page. So that submitted stays there. If I don't have this e.prevent default, I hit add user. That goes away. I can also see my tab. It's refreshing on my tab. That is bad. So what I want to do is I want to prevent default. So now when I click add user, I get my submitted and I'm still here. Okay, So the next thing I want to do is I want to get the values from my form. Well, I can type in here now, but I have a problem of how do I get these values? And what I actually need to do is I need to do this in a React way, because right now it's just kind of following a HTML input default way. So I need to do this in the React way of with state. So what I need to do is I need to import that use state hook from React. And then for each of my inputs, I need to create state for that. So first name, I'm going to do this camel case, first name, set, first name, equals use state. So this is just going to be holding the state of my name, the first name variable value. So I'm just going to default that to an empty string. That's going to be the initial state. And then here on my input, I can say the value equals that state, first name. So if I change this to like taco, that now becomes the value. I don't want that to be initial state. Just want that to be an empty string. Well, now when I do that, now when I click on my input, it doesn't do anything. My state, because my state's not changing. So now my input's broken. If I come in here and I click on it, it's not doing anything. Because what I need to do is I need to add a handler now on change. So when this inputs change, I want to run a function. So just follow with me on this one. This takes the event. So this is on change. The event is going to be like the key pressed. And then I'm going to have this run a function set first name. And how I get the value, I can get it from the event. So this is just something you can kind of like copy and paste, but it's going to be the e.target.value. The event is going to be the input. The event.target is going to be the input, and the value is going to be whatever is the value inside of that. So now when I click, it calls this on change. It sets my first name to whatever in the input. So now it works. So yeah, I think this can be a little confusing, but the nice thing about this becomes very repetitive. So if I wanted to do another form input, like last name, well, I'm just going to create some state for my last name. I'm going to create a setter for that, set the initial state to something that's blank. On my input, the value is going to be last name. And the on change, it's going to be the same thing where I give it this function that takes an event, and then it sets my last name to e.target.value. And now my last name can get updated. Likewise, do the same thing for the email. Email set email. then for that input, give it a value, email, give this the on change. Give it this function right here where it takes the event. Then we can set email to be e.target.value. So now I have all of those. And so then now how can I get the values from my form? Well, now I have this state. I have my first name. I have my first name state. I have my last name state. And I have my email. So I can just name, name, email.com. So when I click add user, is that, yeah, I get my name, my email.com, and my first name. So now I have these values. All right. Let's keep going and then we'll take a break, but I want to go over, talk about this before the break and then kind of review after the breaks. This is definitely, I think, once we start moving to React as a single page application, I think it definitely adds some complexity. And I think this can be hard to kind of wrap your head around. There's a lot more steps, but once again, we're going to be making a nicer UI because this is just a single page application. It's going to now run really smoothly. We're going to have a lot of control and power in how we create our UXs. We can create very unique, very user-friendly UXs this way. It's part of the reason why JavaScript and things like React have gotten so popular. Because now I don't have to go to a whole new page to get a form. I can still see my users. I can do all of this in one page. With Rails, I have to go get a new form, go to that page, and then I have to hit submit. And all of this stuff can take a while. It maybe is just milliseconds behind the scenes, but that creates kind of a choppy UX. This is going to be very smooth and very fast, but it adds complexity because what is going on here is I have my users component, and so I have my users component that is holding the state of where it's on my state of my users live. And that's rendering a new users component. What I want to do here in my users component is I want to add the values from my form to this users array. So I want there to be a const add user function here that takes a user and adds this to our state, because we actually have two steps we're going to do. For now, we're going to skip this. Add user, this is from form. So the first thing we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to add the user, from the form to DB, but we're going to skip today. I'm just leaving that note. This can maybe be a to-do. Eventually, once we once we hit add user, we're going to want to add this user to the database. We're not going to do that today, but our next step because if you think about Rails with what we're doing last week, when we created a user, we would add it to the database. We'd go create a user, we'd add it to the database. Then we do a redirect to our index page, which would do a whole new reload of our index page and do a whole new request to get all of our users. What we're going to do here is we're just going to add the user to our database, and then we're just going to update our UI to add that one user. So there's no redirect, there's no like reloading our page. We just change our UI, but we actually can add it to the database. So it's a little more complicated, but once again, it's going to create a better UI because our page isn't going to refresh. You're going to see, like, as we get more into React, you're going to see why like refreshing pages can kind of create bad user experiences because it kind of resets our state of where we're at. So what I want to do here, and this is kind of from like yesterday. This is what you did yesterday in your homework. We added something to an array of users. And how did you do that? So we have our users array. We want to take that users array and we want to add a user to it. I could do something like this, users.push user. I mean, that's what I want to do, right? I want to add this user from my form to my array. Can't do it that way because we need to do this in a non-mutating way. And then I also want to use this set users function. So I can't update users. I can't update this state, even though this is an array. I can't do this. I can't do users.push. Doesn't work. This is why I was having you yesterday do these functions in a non-mutating way, because we have to do it that way. So let's say I have a new array, new users array variable here. How would I create that new array with the user added?
Do the deconstructing thing or whatever.
Yeah, I'm going to spread out over users and then add that user. And then I can use my set users function and set it to the new array. So now I haven't changed this. I've left my users as is. I've just created a new array. And now I can do that. Declare that as a variable. All right. So I have this add user function that takes a user and adds it to my array. So this looks like it should work, right? Looks good. It looks good to me. I think this should work, but I'm not using it. This add user function, I want to use in this component. Right? Like I have this add users function that's defined in my users component, but I want to use that like right here. But that's not defined here. right? That's defined in my users component. Any ideas on how I could pass that down?
Should we just import it?
I can't import it. I mean, I can, yeah, I'm gonna say no, because I'm like in this, I'm like within my users component. How can I pass stuff down to a component?
Can we hand it as props?
Yeah, exactly. So I can pass it as a prop. I'm just gonna call it X, but I'm gonna call this prop X, and I'm gonna set it equal to the add user function. So add user is not defined, but you know it is defined props dot X. This one's a user, right? So I'm gonna do first name, last name. Actually, I want to pass this as an object. Last name, colon last name, email, colon email. So now I can pass that function down. I called it X, so I can get it off of props.x, and then I can call that function, pass it the user, which is just an object, you know, with first name, last name. Actually, that is not quite correct. Remember, our key is first underscore name. Is that right? That's how we get it back from the database. We're using first underscore name. But the value is going to be first name, because that's what I defined it here. It's probably not the best to have these differently named, but I think this happens though, because the way we're getting it back from our database is in camel case. So that's why I'm using it as, snake case. That's why I'm using it snake case here, because I'm getting it back from the database. The keys are going to be snake case. But then I'm following JavaScript convention here of naming my variables camel case. Probably would down the road we want to match these, but that require adding some more functions. So I'm just going to leave it like this for now, because I'm just trying to get this to work. joebob email.com. Add users. joebob email.com. Joe1, Bob1, add. So now my add is working. Might be easier to see that if I add the user at the start of the array. That's pretty easy. Just need to do user, add that to the start. Doing CRUD actions in React is difficult. So this is going to take a second. And then especially once we start matching it up to the database, we'll do this tomorrow. But we're going to get a lot of repetition with this. So, you know, if the homework is maybe you just do a get and create, I think that's good. Or if you just do the get, if you want to just focus on one of them and really focus on it, I think that's fine. Yeah, it's going to I think it can be a lot to wrap your head around because we're all now we have to do all this stuff with maintaining state, passing these props down to help update this state can be a little bit much. But the benefit we're getting is now we have this single page application. I refresh my page once. So I'm getting all my HTML, all my CSS, all my JavaScript. You know, I get that all at once. And then everything I do from here on out, I'm just going to be doing Axios calls. So it creates this really quick, really seamless UI UX. Like if this was Rails, like it would have like my page would have blanked out for a second, maybe would have got stuck on a spinner for like a couple seconds. This is all now like pretty much happening like instantaneously. Because I'm not getting any more pages. I'm just kind of doing these calls underneath the hood. And then I have one page. I have this page that is now my new and show all in one. Let's take a break. I know it's 12:30. Let's just take a quick like 10-minute break, or let's do like an 8-minute break. Let's come back at 12:35. I want to see if I can maybe do like the delete really quick. And it'll kind of act as a little bit of a review. So I'll also go ahead and Slack this out too. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a delete on a user. Maybe this will kind of serve as a little bit of a review. So what we do here is when this user's component, maybe something that might help here is to add some styling. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to wrap my render users function call in a div, just so I can give it some style. So let's actually just do a class name. I'll call this users list. This isn't really going to do anything with the functionality. It's just going to help us see where these components are. It's going to give this like a huge border. 5 pixels, solid red. So there's my users list. I'm going to go to my user form, just give that a class name. User form. Oh, 50, that's huge. I don't want to do 50, let's just do 5. Okay, and then I can do like a dot user form. Green, did I call that? Maybe just give this a little margin just to create some space. Okay. So my user form, I have my users. I could also just give this a style, a class name. This is my users component. This can kind of, just creating these borders around can sometimes help when you're learning React, just to kind of see where, you know, things are. Border, did I not? Class name equals users. Where's my orange border? Did I spell something wrong? Class name equals users. Inspect, let me see if that's getting there so I can inspect my element. Users here, div class. Why's that not getting that? Refresh. Oh, I guess I just have to refresh. Okay. So all I'm doing here is, you know, this can maybe help represent like where your components are. So the orange is the user's component. The green is my form. And then the red is just where I'm rendering that list. And then the black is each individual user. So that can kind of help you visualize this. So if I go to my users, JS, this is where I'm, keeping track of my user state. And this is where I render over my users. Because what I want to have happen is, for each user, maybe I want like let's just do a button for now, like a delete button. So now each of my users has a delete button. And then for this button, I could do a on click. I could make a function delete user. What do I call that? Delete user is not defined. So now I'd ask myself, well, where do I want to define this function? I want to do it because I'm going to want to change the state here in my users component. So I can actually define this here, const delete user. Now I'm just going to do a console.log delete here. So I can inspect. So now if I click the delete button, it clicks delete, or it logs delete here. Cool. So this is where, and this is a to do. This is where I'd like delete user from database. I'm going to want to do that. I'm going to do later. So in our delete function, we're going to want to do an Axios call, or like a later API call delete user from the database. But then once we do that, we're going to want to remove user from UI. So we can skip the database call for now. And now we want to remove the user from the UI. There's what do I need though? I need something here to remove my user. Whether it's from, if it was from the database or from the UI, what do I need? What does this function need? I need a way to know which user to delete. So this function needs some way to identify the user. And since we're just doing that from the UI, I could use the email, just something unique, or the name. I just need a way like to know which user to delete. But something that we're probably going to use is something like a unique identifier, which is, in this case, we could just use the ID. So delete user, and then I can pass this function the user ID. Okay, now this delete here was called 6 times. I called this function 6 times. So now this takes an ID. We get console.log the ID. Refresh. See how I'm logging delete here, 1, delete here, 2, delete here, 3. I'm logging the ID of the user. This is bad though, right? Should I be logging this as this component is met? Like, should I log all the users I should delete on mount? If this actually worked, that would just have deleted all my users.
You want to do it on click.
Yeah, here's my yeah, I'm doing the on click delete user. This is a little different than the infinite error we got. Like it's not going to get as stuck into an infinite loop, but it's going to call this on all the users. I only want to call this when this is clicked, but I do need to pass the user ID. So I do have to use the parentheses. So I need to wrap this. I'm going to wrap this in a function that returns this function call. And now when I refresh, it doesn't run that delete user function, but when I click delete, then it just logs the delete here and then the ID of the user to delete. So, yeah, like I said, we can skip the API call from now. So how do I remove, and this kind of goes back to yesterday, if you got to the CRUD action part of yesterday's assignment, I have an array of users, which are an array of objects that have the ID key. I want to go through, I want to remove one of the users. And I want to create a new array of the users with that one removed.
You do filter?
Yeah, so that one I use my filter method. So I could say something like this, like let, filtered users take my current state of users and filter them. Go through each user. Hey, does the user.id, as long as it does not match the ID that was given to me in this function. And then I can set users to my filtered users. Delete, delete. So now that's removing them from my UI. I'm going to create a new user, let's just call it user one, last, an email, add user. I'm going to try to delete this user. How did that work? I'm confused. How did that work? The reason why I'm a little confused is that user does not have an ID. So if I add this user one and I click delete this user, delete here, that's undefined. So undefined does not equal. Is that right? Undefined does not equal. I guess that is true. That's a little weird. This is kind of like an unexpected behavior. It's like working, but it's not. This is going to be a very bad bug. Because you see why this, like I was expecting this to break because this user does not have an ID. Because we didn't create it to the database, but then I hit delete and it does actually delete because I guess undefined, the ID of the user is undefined and undefined does not equal like a number. So it does remove it, but it removes it for a bad reason. Now we'll normally not get into this issue because when we successfully, we'll only delete our user if we successfully add the user to the database. So then it would have an ID. But something I might want to do in my form for now is just create an ID and do like math.random. Just to generate, since we're not actually interacting with an ID with the database, I could just come in here and create a random ID. So that way, when I do create a new user and then I click delete, it actually does have some ID. So there is the delete. I don't think I'm going to get into update. Update is definitely the most challenging one to do. So I think this is enough. The reason, there's a couple of reasons update's a little harder, because there's a couple different ways we could do update. We could try to have an update form and then have a button that kind of auto populates. I think the easier way is to have a update form on each of our users. And so then that way it's pre-populated. And but yeah, we don't have time to get into that. So I think what would benefit you today is, I think this is more about quality than quantity for your homework. Because we talked about a lot today. We talked, it's kind of an intro to React, an intro to Axios, intro to CRUD actions, and then we're talking about props and state. So there's a lot going on. So the homework's going to be to do like, I think I have it up. It's going to be something similar where there's this API call we can do right here. So this would be an HTTP GET request to this URL. It's going to give you back this data. And it's just some array of data with some information about books. Now, just a quick note, these books do not have an ID, but they do have an ISBN, which is a unique identifier. So you can't use the ID because they don't have an ID, they have an ISBN. But that's a way you can get the unique values. That's how you can kind of determine what they are. So it's going to be very similar, where you do this and the use effect hook and use state to get this data and to render it. I would say if that's all you do today, if you just do the GET request to get the data and render it, that's good. If you feel up for it, you can try to do the add method. You can attempt that, where you create the form, add it to your state. Yeah, for the bonus objectives, you can delete a book, you can style, you can add more attributes. You can attempt edit, but I would hold off that one unless you really want to challenge. But yeah, like I said, quality over quantity on this one. So if you get this like 50% done, if you get it 25% done, but you kind of do a little research into like use state, use effect. Like I said, if you're a little confused about use state, take some time to like read a couple articles on use state. If you're confused about like props versus state in React, I think that can be, something that people get confused on initially. So yeah, the more, like I said, the more you can focus on just understanding this, I think I care way more about that than you getting this done. Tomorrow we'll do an example where we create a Rails app and we do CRUD actions, where we actually do some CRUD actions on an actual database. So we can see these steps happening. But cool. I think that's good for now. What's your kind of initial impression on React?
It's a lot.
It is a lot. One of the nice things about React, I think, well, a couple things. It is largely, so much of it is just JavaScript. So as you're learning React, you really do become just a really good JavaScript developer. I think when you like learn something like Angular in particular, there's like a lot of stuff you're doing with Angular that is like specific to Angular. I mean, there's obviously stuff you're doing in React that's specific to React, but a lot of React is so much just JavaScript. So I think it gets you to be a good JavaScript developer. The other nice thing about React is, yeah, it's a lot, but once you kind of get a grasp on React, then you can use that knowledge to get into React Native, which allows you to write native mobile apps. And it's a little like React and React Native are not the same thing, but you would almost do this the exact same in a React Native, where you do a use effect call, you would get your data, you would render over it. Just, you wouldn't be rendering JSX, you'd be rendering native components. So React has this paradigm of you learn once and write anywhere. So if you learn React, you can use React to write web apps, you can use it to write native apps, you can write it to even use desktop apps. But yes, this is a lot. I'm not going to argue against that. Does it all make sense with how we're not with these actions? We're not doing full HTTP requests to get a new page. We're just doing these Axios calls and behind the scenes. So it creates like a really nice UI, UX. I should say UX, user experience. Cool. Yeah, that's it. Let's go ahead, take lunch. What time is it? It's just about 1. So yeah, let's come back at 2. And I will Slack this out because this has the delete function as well. Actually, I'll just push this up to GitHub. I need to create a repo, but I'll create a repo and throw this link up on GitHub on Slack. Cool. Well, that is it for me. So if you have any questions, you can hop off for lunch. I'll get this repo up in there in like a couple minutes.
By the way, James, I love your Wasatch Brewery sweater.
Oh, thank you. This is a good one.
Right, I used to go there all the time.
Yeah, I love that. Like the squatters on 4 South. Yeah, I would go there like twice a month.
Nice.
Man, I miss it. Been in Sacramento for a month. I'll be back Salt Lake for Thanksgiving, so maybe I'll stop on by there.
Well, that's way cool.
We'll probably do a ugly sweater competition with all of us so that you can all have your opportunities.